Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Chris, welcome. Great to see you again. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. Good to see you again, Ben.
Pleasure to have you here. And I think we are ready to get started. Chris, I think most people here know what the webinar is about. If anybody doesn't, this is about AI, and you work for a company called Gorilla, and your approach to AI enablement in your company. Would you mind just saying hello and tell us a little bit about Gorilla and a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Happy to do that. So I'm Chris, Security and Compliance at Gorilla. I guess Gorilla, so I'm not exactly an expert. I'm the one in security compliance here, but we are a data analytics platform within the energy industry, predominantly energy retailers, helping them with pricing and forecasting. As you imagine, energy retailers are quite sensitive when it comes to data. Anything that goes on within the energy industry sort of hits the news, hence security and compliance ends up being pretty critical to them. They're very keen on hearing anything to do with, if we get ISO, SOC 2, all these kind of things, and obviously are very sensitive when it comes to things like talk around AI. So
Great. So how does Gorilla and AI fit together? Why have you looked at AI and thought, we want to get this enabled? Where do you see this taking the business?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of different places we could be taking it. Right now, it's a case of personally, I see it almost as like right now, AI becomes a bit of a blank slate. And the problem is really for us, luckily we've got some great people in the business that have some good ideas and about how we can kind of execute that. And I'm happy to talk about that a bit later. But right now, we're kind of just trying to set out some kind of rough areas where we'll be like, okay, here's where we're going to start playing with AI. Here's where, because as I said, we work within sort of energy retailers. They tend to not be all, maybe not the quickest adopters when it comes to things like AI, or at least they want to be very aware of the risks around it.
Yeah.
And so for us, we kind of have to mimic our industry.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to just kind of like throw ourselves into this. We really need to make sure that it's controlled. We've got like excellent governance around it. And, on the topic of this webinar, it's kind of one of the things I'm finding with AI is that you just can't, it's so hard to keep on top of. It's not a one person job. It's a case that I'm really relying on, I can try and follow the news and things like that, but just interest within the company. I'm learning, suddenly there's a new, AI device or app or something that people are trying to use. And it's really just trying to have something in place where I can kind of like steer the direction that Gorilla is going. Beginning a kind of Gemini ended up being one of the first, I'd say, like projects related to AI that's kind of going on within Gorilla. Just because it's there. We use Google Workspace. It does come up naturally, and it's really just a case of like, all right, we need to get ahead of this before our users, our employees start driving it, for us.
So you're obviously very, as a company, very security conscious. You've got a lot of regulations that impact your industry. Just in terms of the wider context of what Gorilla might get out of AI enablement, what are you seeing as the potential use cases? Is this you wanting to use AI tools internally for employees to be more productive? Are you guys thinking about deploying AI into your product in some way? And I guess the lens for my question is, when you think about your impact on your customers and their needs for you to behave according to regulations, compliance, what's the relationship between what you're trying to get done and the restrictions that are being imposed on you?
Yeah, so that kind of feeds into a bit of, as part of our strategy, kind of talking about, we really need to kind of map out across the business exactly where it is that we can play with AI. Because of, again, the nature of our industry, we can't necessarily, we're not that keen at just suddenly saying, oh, let's say we add OpenAI as a sub-processor, that's just going to send alarm bells all to our customers and things like that. And, we're not trying to force AI on our customers, hence why it's not necessarily kind of like on our roadmap. People do ask us about it, but right now at these maybe relatively kind of early stage for like enterprise AI, it's a case of, right, let's carve out some areas within the business that we can afford to say, like, let's sandbox here. Let's say, like, where can we, and part of it is, yeah, we want to drive like productivity and everything like that. But the other part is that it's going to get away from us, like cats out the bag kind of thing of, we've got people here that, if they decide to open up ChatGPT and they suddenly learn of some kind of new interesting thing that they can do with it, it's going to go that way. So we just need to be able to put those kind of guardrails around those little pockets in the business. So for us, it's a case that one of the areas that we're, less keen to say we're adopting is anything where it's, specifically customer data, things like that. It's completely, out of the realm and needs a whole separate, much larger project before that starts going on. But internally, there are things within, so I sit within the operations team where we say, well, we can drive productivity growth and we can, that's good for us, but also it's good for everybody else. We talk maybe about, is the ultimate goal for AI within Gorilla being something like eventually 4-day work weeks, that kind of style of like big picture thinking to try and like drive us in one direction.
Okay, so one of the things you mentioned there was avoiding putting customer data into AI tools. And the implication, I think, is that once you can establish the right security boundaries around being able to do so, there's some value that you could get out of that. I want to park that conversation just for a moment. I really want to get into it. But before we do, what are the values that you're getting out right now with AI adoption? So where are the are there any particular tools, or not tools, but features that you've built that use AI, or any particular bots that you're using that are very effective, or any specific use cases where you go, this is a fantastic use of AI currently inside our organization?
It's an interesting one because currently a lot of our AI use ends up being something where, if we're using a tool and it becomes a feature, and it's a case that we risk assess that one feature and decide, is it, again, I know the topic of this is Gemini, but that is quite a key one. There are a lot of things where, especially, for example, within our sort of our people team, our sort of HR team, where we've got a sort of change in our tech stack and suddenly some of those tools are popping up with AI. That's one where, okay, we've got to be very aware of like the compliance issues around there, especially with the incoming EU AI Act. It's one of the interesting things I am seeing actually that's coming up is not necessarily the AI tools that are being implemented, but it's more the processes that are kind of being built in place that kind of presume some kind of AI knowledge or use. So, for example, we have if we're going through like a feedback process or something where we're going through a feedback cycle as a company, I'm seeing people are putting prompts as a good way of basically formatting if you're writing out something to try and like say, okay, here's how the best way to deliver this and review yourself. I find that quite interesting because it is just presuming a certain level of, that we're happy to do this and everything like that. And that's completely fine because for us, it's low risk and we don't really mind. But outside of that, Gemini ends up being the first one where we're like, okay, let's move ahead with this one. The other features, I mean, we use other things like, for example, Asana, and there's a couple of AI features in there, but they're very much kind of quite limited right now.
Okay. And you mentioned you're seeing people, did you say that you're seeing people share prompts with each other? Or yeah, that's really interesting. So we are obviously going to dig into, like, the whole purpose of us talking is about the security and the governance and how to enable AI safely. But all of this is predicated on the fact that people want to use AI because there's value in it, there's productivity. So I think it's worth us kind of touching on that just a little bit. what are you seeing internally, like the behaviors of the employees in your company in terms of helping each other use AI better? You've already mentioned people sharing prompts with each other. Have you seen anything interesting in terms of people going, oh my gosh, you can do this? Like,
yeah, I mean, if you don't mind, I'll talk a little bit just on our sort of our AI governance structure, because that kind of feeds into part of it, because you could almost kind of see it as a bit of a almost a loose pyramid of, we have an AI management group that is just people that are either technical, or someone like myself who's a bit more interested in the security side of things, operational sort of people team, because a big part of this is making sure, and we've seen it actually with these note-taking apps, the importance of basically baking in some kind of ethics and making sure everybody's on board with it, because undoubtedly it ends up we're seeing it a lot where people's emotions get tied into this technology, and that can end up being a bit of pushback. So it's good to have someone there that is a bit more aware of that. But how we do it is we've got a AI management group who, with underneath that, we've got a sort of Gen AI interest group. And to get into that Gen AI interest group, you've got to do some kind of training. It's something that you then demonstrate, and then you get within there, and it's just a talking, and they tend to be the early adopters. We're wanting people in there that are sharing all the latest things in news, having chats. We saw about what is it? The Google Flow TV was like the last thing that came up in there that's quite interesting, and people just chatting about it. And that is our group that will be the early adopters of anything. If we were to say, okay, here's some AI tool, they're the people that are going to run ahead and find all the use cases and all the interesting things there.
and
But we can't.
Are they also the people who are finding the risks, or is that part of your security?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes they're pretty on it. I'm thinking in particular, we were talking about nowadays, you can see these things where, what is it? Is it a pendant that kind of goes around and records all the conversations you're having and summarizes it, and you can ask back, and it's like wearable AI. That's kind of set alarm bells off a lot of people straight away, because that's quite, invasive, you might say. But yeah, sometimes they're quite aware of it. But on the flip side of this AI interest group, we're quite keen to also keep an eye on the people that are going to be like the detractors. And even yesterday, when we were kind of doing a bit of a test thing for Gemini, I was speaking to somebody who was like, I don't even know what I'd do with this. I don't know why I'd want to use this. What's the benefit of it? All this thing. And I think that's where we need these early adopters to basically drive forwards and say, like, oh, here's all the interesting things we can do, and pull along those people that aren't necessarily so interested. They've got to demonstrate the value of this. And I think we're realizing that needs to be sort of baked into our processes here when we are adopting AI, is that you need, because it's such a clean slate, like you make AI what you want it to be in some aspects. We need those people to drive and pull the others along.
Okay, that makes sense. So I think this is probably the perfect time to transition towards you have this theoretical panacea of perfect AI adoption. Imagine the most perfect AI tool possible. Maybe it's Gemini, maybe it's not. Then the question is, how do you deploy this safely? So I think what I'd love to ask you is, where are you at with your Gemini adoption process? And in particular, what kind of controls have you put in place for AI safety? And what I'll try and dig into afterwards is, what is the ideal world for the controls that you're missing? Because I think, having spoken with you before, we've had some very interesting chats, and I know that you've had ideas thinking, gosh, there are some gaps, and I'd love to dig into that. So where are you at with Gemini, and what controls do you have at the moment?
Sure. So with Gemini right now, we've, as of kind of yesterday's discussion, kind of put it on a bit of a a limited use. There's a few people that are using it. There's early adopters that are doing it, within certain guardrails that they are reporting back and everything like that. But it ended up being the case that we realized quite quickly, and I noticed this with basically all of our AI tools, the initial risk assessment to be like, okay, how is it handling our prompts? How is it handling our data? It's pretty easy. Like, that's not, for me, that isn't the big concern, because I can quite quickly find out exactly how Google is handling my data, and it's fine. The problem ends up being that, particularly for Gemini, is that the benefit of Drive is that it is amazing at collaboration. Like, it's great for pulling people into documents and everything like that. And that's kind of part of why we're here talking with Metomic, is the fact that for us, great for collaboration, but it is clear that it slowly erodes kind of the basics of role-based access, or trying to have a kind of like a top-down approach, because information is all over the place. People are pulled into documents, but documents are constantly evolving. And one of the reasons that I was speaking to this person yesterday about, who wasn't so keen on it, is they've been at the company a long time, and chances are that a document that they might have worked on in like 3 years ago is an entirely different document now. And Gemini now has this, the problem isn't now that like, oh, sorry, it's not so much a problem, but it's previously, they wouldn't even know if they had access to something sensitive. They had to go out and find it. Now with Gemini, it's so easy. They just have to ask the right question and it appears. And it's so hard to put controls exactly on what is going to appear within the kind of Gemini context.
Yeah.
And it's hard to have that balance of, okay, yeah, go ahead and use Gemini, but also still being able to use the flexibility of Google Drive.
Mm.
And this is something that we're battering against, and that we've talked about it, where I have a bit of a wish list of what I could do with Gemini, where, if I was able to limit certain things that were able to enter it, I mean, that'd be perfect. But the way that we've had to go around that is coming up with some kind of adversarial querying that we're just going to have to run quarterly to basically make sure that certain key people are, okay, if there was a document that had changed the context of, that they now have access to sensitive information, that we can flag it early, because ultimately there's no other way of doing it.
Yeah, this is something that we're thinking very deeply about at the moment in terms of ongoing AI protection, and I absolutely love the idea of the red team exercise of looking at your AI system and looking at all of the exfiltration that would be possible in your user base. And of course, with Gemini in particular, it's very likely that your user base is your employees. But as you guys get more deeply embedded, as other companies get more deeply embedded, and they start to grow their own models, or they start to use tools that maybe produce chatbots or agents that are then used by other people, including outside their company, that exfiltration landscape increases. And as I said, we've been thinking very deeply recently about how we automatically and continuously produce that red team exercise. So essentially, and this is one of the most interesting things that's happening in our industry in particular at the moment, is that data leaks in the past have always been seen as leaks of large quantities of data. That's what most people will think of when they think of a data leak. It's like, leak of a billion records from this database. What's happening now is all of the unstructured data that has sat around unobserved, for a large part, unobserved in tools, SaaS tools, typically like Google Drive, perhaps even chat applications like Slack. That content is knowledge, which, when extracted by the wrong people, produces devastating results. And so there's an interesting shift for us where we see the AI risk of giving AIs access to your unstructured content. You end up with this knowledge leak problem, where if, say with Gemini, if you have a large organization and your content is not locked down, your permissioning structure is wrong in Google Drive, then you get the problem that you just described, which is on day one, the intern goes, what's the CEO's private diary entries for this week? And he wouldn't have been able to find that in the past, no idea where to look, but you give Gemini to the organization and every single employee has this ability. By extension, you make a chatbot and you train it with all your content, you give that to a customer. Your customer now has the ability to extract this information. So I'm really glad you mentioned the red teaming, and you said once a quarter. I think this should be every second, continuous. There's a very, very clear value, security value, I think that we get out of that approach.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're even seeing it. We use sort of like you say other SaaS tools, things like Notion, where like, and it's particularly, I guess, maybe obvious in companies that are growing quite quickly. So Gorilla's growing quite quickly, and with the headcount increasing, the number of roles changing, like it is a challenge to keep enforcing, like you should have access to this, you should have access to this. And quite often there might be cases, they're documents that, let's say a customer team or a product team has suddenly splintered apart. Well, do you think the data is actually splintered apart along with those changes in team structure? Is not always the case. So it does seem to vary. It even comes with like the use of like Notion AI and things like that. Like we're seeing it a lot more where it's a big tidy up exercise before we can start saying like, do you even know what you're getting out of it is quality? Because I don't know if there's quality in there. Like,
got it. So fundamentally, it sounds like what you're saying there is that the root of the problem when you plug in your tools is the underlying access of, say, Google Drive in this case. It's the access permissions on the files themselves. Who's able to access what content. With Notion AI, does that work the same way in which Notion is accessing the content through the employee, or are you pulling content out of Google Drive somewhere else?
Yeah, so with Notion AI, it still respects your access setup. Still respects exactly what somebody's able to I guess be able to view. The problem more is that, like, let's say we've had a bit of a move between knowledge bases or a bit of a growth or something like that. Some documents are in there that have been kept up to date continuously, and there are other documents in there that we realized at a certain point, this now needs to move into we've got a different tool that manages this or something like that. That data is still in Notion, or it could still be in Google Drive. How do I know that data shouldn't be fed into the context window for whatever RAG system I'm using? And Notion has an interesting thing where you can use kind of the verified point, but it still pulls in. You can verify pages as active for however long. But yeah, it's a challenge that we're definitely seeing at Gorilla. And in fact, we had this conversation actually at dinner not long ago, and you put a question about seeing how other companies are doing it. That was particularly interesting, and I learned a lot of positioning where Gorilla is in kind of the AI governance cycle. But I'd be interested to hear, how are the other customers handling these things?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I've been speaking recently with a lot of our customers, specifically about how they're approaching AI, what they're trying to achieve, what they've done already and where they're going. And it should be no surprise that pretty much every customer is doing something slightly different, even though the end goals are typically the same. But the rough breakdown of how we see, or what we're seeing in terms of AI adoption, falls into three main buckets, and those three buckets have distinct security concerns. The very first, the thing that everybody started doing, and it was what everybody cared about up until even just a few months ago, was just getting access to generative AI tools like ChatGPT. So companies were saying, I want my employees to be able to use ChatGPT. I do not want them to upload sensitive documents to ChatGPT. So there was a lot of concern around how do we lock down employees' use of generative tools. What has happened in the meantime is that, and this is I think probably very predictable, is that there's limited value to be gotten out of a public tool like ChatGPT. Really, as an organization, if you want to get smart, you want to get productive, you want a version of ChatGPT that deeply understands your organization. So you're not asking general questions, but you're saying, look, in my company, how do I do this thing? And so, of course, we get to the second pillar, which is companies building knowledge bases. So that means embedding something like Glean or even Gemini at this point, given that it's internal. Notion AI, these kinds of tools, they're helping you ingest all of the content in your organization and then produce a knowledge base or multiple knowledge bases with perhaps different access controls out of that. The third pillar is just one natural step further, which is companies going, okay, I actually want these units now, or my AI tools, to take action. So this is agentic, essentially. But at the same time, those agents need access to the right content inside your org to be able to do their jobs. Now, the key thing about agentic is that's the point at which you typically start to interface with the outside world. So if you pull together an agent, there's a few customers I've spoken to who are, this is probably the most obvious use case, wanting to supplement their customer support function with agentic AI. So think, intercom bots or any chat bot that can help answer questions more quickly, and without bothering the internal team, for more kind of hands-on conversation. Those bots are exposed to the outside world. And so at that point, your risk profile increases. And here's why this is interesting. This pillar here, the ChatGPT use case, the risk was my employees are taking content from my Google Drive and uploading it to ChatGPT. This security concern pales in comparison to I have already embedded an AI system into my organization. It knows everything. The problem is, does it know too much? And who's got access to those systems? So in terms of some of what we're seeing companies do to make this happen and mitigate this, the industry right now feels like it's at a very early stage of effective, secure enablement. There's been a lot of push towards just enablement. So most of the tools you integrate with will help you go, connect me all the data, but they won't help you so well in terms of saying, okay, but here's what shouldn't be seen. So go grab this content, but nothing like this. So what we're seeing for companies who are stuck behind that limitation, great example from a French company I spoke to recently, they wanted an agentic bot that could communicate with their customers. They have a great repository of conversational data with existing customers, but the challenge is that that data set is very rich for a human to read and understand. Okay, this is what we get asked. They can't put it into an AI system because it's full of sensitive data. It's full of IP. Maybe there's some off-topic content in there. What they ended up doing was pulling that data out and using a tool to redact. Now, this is exactly what we do, but redact the sensitive content from the data set to produce a much smaller one that had all of that value that they were then able to provide to their AI. Now, this is where we see secure AI enablement going. This is how we're thinking about this as a company, and what we'd like to bring to the market is we are helping companies get AI enabled right now by cleaning up the data in their tools. So cleaning up the data and the permissioning in Google Drive, cleaning up existing data in Slack where there's conversations with customers, etc., so that AI tools can be plugged into it. But we see this, we see ourselves taking this one step further, which is essentially about identifying as much of the right data as possible to get given to those tools. So almost like an automated data provision, where the security is the reason you get the good data out of it. It's making sure that any sensitive content is redacted, any content that is internal or shouldn't be seen by outsiders is pulled out, and you only get the stuff that you need at the end.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, I think we talked a bit about before. I would love to explore something like that. Like you mentioned, let's say on Gemini, where like an intern searches what is the CEO's like personal diary entry. Being able to have like a rag system where like one of these bots where I could say, this is the interns like bot, this is the like operations, this is the finance bot or something like that. Like that's perfect. And we've tried, at Gorilla, we've explored, what's the possibility of having something. We've talked a little bit about these like AI note takers. They're taking in so much information, so much valuable information, but also so much sensitive, personal, like similar to the customer things. Like we could even use it within, let's say, our product team, saying, okay, what is going on? Let's provide updates to everybody, exactly what's happening in the product. But how it is that like we can try and distinguish that, where it should go, where it should feed into, because ultimately at the point it's in there, it's too late, because I can't put like a DLP solution on an output because it's someone's seen it. Do you know what I mean? It's past the point that I can do anything about it. So and you're talking about between the pillars of 2 and 3. I'm talking mostly there with 2, but even now with the likes
knowledge-based use case.
The knowledge-based use case.
So why don't we talk about what you guys can do today if you just focus on Gemini? So the risk that you've just described is essentially your users can extract information out of your knowledge base, which is Google Drive at this point, and Gemini, and you want to figure out what's overexposed. So if you just look at Gemini as a tool, if you think about all the companies out there in the world who are trying to get Gemini deployed, and that's all they've got, what is the effectiveness right now of Gemini's internal security controls to manage this? How have you found that experience?
Pretty limiting, to be honest. It's from our experience of playing around with it, Gemini's sort of inbuilt thing is from like a technical point of view of exactly what Gemini is. It respects all your kind of permission structure. Brilliant. But for me, the ideal thing would be is, can I do something where I label documents? Like, can I say, don't return sensitive things within Gemini? Which to me seems like quite a relatively basic ask of saying, if I am already putting in the work to do some automatic labeling based on the content of a file, don't return it, like, please.
We've faced this exact challenge, actually. So the way we approach this is, for anyone on in the audience who doesn't know, Metomic is a platform that will help you observe and control the content in your SaaS tools. So we protect sensitive data in SaaS applications. But where this maps to what you've just said, Chris, is Gemini doesn't have a control that lets you say, don't allow this to be used by the tool, or if you've labeled a document, don't read these documents. So the way we've got around this with our customers is we do the labeling. So, and this is, you don't have to, but typically customers want to see the label on the file to understand how it's been classified. But then the next step is, okay, if Gemini won't respect that label, if there's no way for you to tell Gemini, then you can at least either remove permission from the individual who shouldn't have had access in the first place, which then removes it from their use of Gemini, or there is a very silently documented way to mark a file as Gemini, you're not allowed to read this file, which is something we discovered recently that's very interesting. So that's raised a few eyebrows. I suspect Google will as they grow the product and the tool, I'm sure they will start adding these controls natively. But right now, as a Google customer, you need to take some extra work to get files out of Gemini's purview?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things as well I've noticed is the amount of integrations that I can put with Drive, where like some people I was saying about this group, the Gemini group, we would talk about Gemini, we say like, oh, well, I could integrate it with, here's a data source that's constantly pulling in like information. Let's throw that into Drive. And then again, Gemini becomes even more valuable as a piece. But then I don't even have that. There's not that human in the loop thing of being like, oh, what is coming in? Can you double check before I start spitting it out? And unfortunately, there isn't the nuance in these integrations to say maybe exactly where it should go, what permissions it should inherit when it does go into there. Like I can maybe sort it out into different folders, but there's no way that I can say, or well, maybe there is eventually, but I can't necessarily try and specify exactly what document goes where from this. It's coming from one source going to another.
Or presumably what category of document or what business use case or documents for a business use case go where.
Yeah.
That's another interesting question. So this is another thing that we're looking at very currently is the ability to be more general purpose when describing the type of document that you're looking to control. And ultimately, this comes down to some form of semantic labeling, which is the difference between, board materials, which is very easy to describe, and until AI, harder to put into a heuristic, versus specific files that you're looking at, which you can't manage at scale. So my question to you is, what tools, do you have any tools in place at the moment, or frameworks or methods of working that help you manage categories of data at scale? When you look at, say, all of this content in your Drive, and you say, how do I break this down? How do I decide what is allowed to be here and what's not? How are you approaching that?
Metomic.
That's not the answer I was looking for. But in terms of like, how do you, what's your mindset to approaching this?
Yeah, I mean, currently it is the case that we have a bit of a restructure as well that we're going on within teams and our permissions and things like that. But ultimately, it does end up being that we have to use Metomic because of the fact that the Drive can be so flexible. We do have different tools for different things, and it's a case that we try to keep, let's say, customer data to the best way possible. That doesn't exist within Drive. Like that should be somewhere else and everything, because then we just don't put it into, it's not even in the equation.
Right.
But undoubtedly there are some minor things that will have to go into there. But it is a case of just trying to make the most of Metomic is I guess the middle ground between like, okay, the information's coming in and I can say like, let's say the author is this, it contains these different things. But the other side of it is that it's the education piece. It's the trying to make sure people are aware of exactly what this information is and putting the ownership on them, which is with Metomic helps with the labeling point of view and being able to do that and being able to send those things out via Slack to say like, okay, by the way, like this is being shared. Are you aware of this? Do you want to do something about it? That kind of thing. But the other point is just honestly, I'm finding more and more that with this AI piece is our policies, if you've made them too specific, are falling apart. And so we really just are having to take things back to absolute principles. An example might be with, if we're talking about our access controls or something like that. Well, maybe not access control is the best thing, but I was talking about with these meeting note takers and the wearable AI pieces and things like that. If I was to say, oh, no sharing your screen, clear desk policy, that's just not applicable anymore. That's not the same level. I need to really boil it down to saying like, making sure that you are aware of the people that are in the room when you're having that conversation and really trying to get it down to that level. Yeah. Otherwise it just is falling apart.
There's there's a thought I just had, which ties into that access control piece, which is that with Google Drive specifically, when you share a file, you can of course share. So it's access control and your base principles that you're talking about. So with Google Drive, when you share a file, you can share a link to the file that's public, or you can share it directly with individuals or with groups. And for 15 years, however long companies have been using Google Drive, the easiest thing in the world to do was to generate that public link. And so we've all done it. We've all done it. You click the button, you go get link, and you send it to the person you want to give access to the file. The problem, of course, now is that every single time that button's been clicked over the last 10 years, there is now a file that's accessible to every single member of the organization. They would never have known where it was before, but Gemini is indexing those files. So there's this whole data mess that leads to the problem we talked about. And one of the base principles, we have this internally, obviously, because we're very conscious about it, but one of the base principles that is changing is when you share something, share it directly with the person that you intend to give access to the file. And that is beginning to end a decade-long shift of SaaS tools, making it as easy as possible to share data because that grows their business. And they're starting to come, you're seeing these controls in the tools that you use where they start to go, are you sure you want to, share this publicly? We're starting to see that pushback. So that's a principle that we see get used a lot. We use it ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, on that piece, another point is that when you're sharing that link, so I'm going to go back to the point of when I was speaking to the person that wasn't so keen on it, on AI adoption. Well, they share the link, that's a new person in there, the context of the file changes, and the person that had access a couple of months ago doesn't know about those changes. But those changes are in there. They could see them if they want. And so we give an example of that keeps coming up is a file that might have been planning now becomes a hiring roadmap that suddenly becomes salary information.
Yeah.
Well, that planning document might have been a whole different beast compared to what it is now. But how does the person know that made the document in the first place?
Yeah.
So it's a big problem. Hence, the adversarial querying is something that we just have to really kind of stay on top of.
Yeah. Chris, we're almost at the end of our allocated time. So I'm going to try and end on a forward-looking future question, which is, you mentioned that there are some sources of data that that people are trying to integrate, and you have to push back in some way because ultimately your security and safety controls are not in place to be able to handle that. But if we remove all constraints, what is the blue sky scenario? If you end up in the perfect garden of AI enablement, what would be the best possible world in terms of what you're able to integrate, and what are the controls that you have around that? Where do you want to see the world get to?
This is going to be such a information security answer. I'm sorry. For me, it's a case of I would love to reach a point where everybody has exactly the information that they need to do their job. Nothing's living in someone's head. No one's having to constantly bug you on Slack and say, can you provide this? If they need something, it's there, and they're able to just purely, in my mind, it makes work a purely creative pursuit. It's something where if you've got the information, it's there. Now you do with it what you need to do with it. That would be, for me, at least within the business, something that it's just a common, everybody hates the communication pitfalls in a company. Just uncoupling that would be amazing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for joining the webinar. This is probably the first time I've ever managed to finish something exactly on time, so I'm very pleased. Everybody have a great day, and thank you again, Chris.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. Thanks all.
See you. Bye-bye.